Close your eyes. Imagine a dimly lit room carved into limestone, torches flickering against the damp walls, casting shadows that twitch like spirits. The air reeks of burnt fat, fermented fish, and something coppery something that smells disturbingly like blood. You're seated on the floor, your feet inches from a sacrificed goat skull. Across from you sits a man in a robe dyed with ochre and ash, his fingers stained red, offering you a bowl its contents, squirming, steaming, whispering. He smiles and says only one word. Eat tonight. We're stepping into that world, a world of forgotten flavors and forbidden feasts, of ancient delicacies that weren't just strange, they were terrifying. Some were born from desperation, others from ritual. Some aimed to nourish, others to summon the dead. And in every corner of the globe, someone, somewhere, once believed that eating such things gave them power. So, steel your stomach, because once you know what was really served, you might never look at food the same way again. The blood bread of Mesopotamia, we begin our journey where civilization itself was born. Ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, a place of temples, scribes, and sky gods, but also of famine, fear, and blood. In times of drought, when crops failed and the priests' chants brought no rain, the people turned to offerings not just for the gods, but for themselves. One such ritual involved what scholars now cautiously refer to as Nindag Sig, a ceremonial bread, black as night, mixed with ox blood and the ashes of burned barley. It wasn't a food, it was an oath. The dough was prepared in near total silence. Women smeared the floors with wine and urine to purify the space, while elder priests bled animals onto hot stones. The bread was kneaded in bowls, made from human skulls, relics of fallen enemies, and then baked in clay ovens that had once served as cremation chambers. According to the tablets excavated at Uruk, those who ate the bread were said to hear voices within 3 nights. Some claimed the blood bread opened the veil, allowing dreams of the underworld. Others said it bound them to the gods forever, and not always in a benevolent way. One cursed line read, "He who consumes it in greed shall never sleep again. His dreams will crawl." Modern archaeologists scoff, of course, but in 1923, when Sir Edwin Hala attempted to recreate the recipe during a private gathering in southern Iraq, 5 guests fell violently ill. One reportedly screamed for hours in a language no one recognized before clawing out his own ear. The experiment was never repeated. Even now, some villagers whisper warnings. Don't knead bread in silence. The spirits might mistake it for an offering. Would you try a bite? The past isn't just behind us. Sometimes, it's still cooking. The rotten feast of Viking berserkers. Picture this. You're standing in a smoky wooden longhouse deep in the Nordic wilds. Snow piles against the door. Outside, wolves howl like ghosts. Inside, men prepare for war not by sharpening blades, but by eating something that smells like death. Something moving. This is no ordinary Viking meal. It's his grandfather, the forgotten predecessor of modern fermented shark. But unlike the cleaned and regulated dish we know today, this meat was once buried for months beneath blood-soaked moss and sealed with bone to ferment in its own rot. It wasn't served with honor, it was served with madness in mind. The feast was called Rafin Fiel, meaning Raven's Summit, a secret rite for berserker Zos, fearsome warriors who fought in a trance, howling and tearing through enemies like rabid beasts. But what made them so uncontrollable? Some say it was magic. Others point to what they ate. The meal was a mixture of half-rotted bear meat, psychotropic mushrooms, and blood curdled with bile. It was a test of strength and spirit. If your stomach could handle it, you were deemed fit to fight. If not, you were left in the snow for the ravens. One saga tells of a young initiate named Orm, who devoured the entire portion in silence. Moments later, he began to laugh. Then he bit through his own wooden shield, crushed the skull of a goat with his bare hands, and vanished into the night. 3 days later, he returned, wearing a wolf's pelt and speaking in riddles no one understood. He would go on to lead 12 raids before being struck down, foaming at the mouth, still laughing. But the recipe that lived on? Passed in whispers? Buried beneath homes? Hidden in stone carvings, too eroded to translate cleanly. And even today, in parts of rural Iceland, old men still bury fish in the earth, not to eat, but to keep the spirits fed. Was it just food poisoning? Hallucinogenic fungi? Or did the berserkers truly commune with something ancient and Whatever the case, Rafnefiol was more than a meal. It was a doorway. The cursed banquet of Pharaoh's court beneath the golden sands of ancient Egypt. Beyond the grand pyramids and silent sphinx, there existed another world. A hidden banquet known only to the inner circle of the Pharaoh's court. A place where food was no longer meant to nourish, but to transform body, spirit, and even fate. They called it Sekhmet's offering, named after the lion-headed goddess of destruction and plague. This banquet was held once every 30 moons in the underground halls of the High Temple at Karnak. It was said that the pharaoh himself only attended once in his lifetime, for to consume what was served there was to gamble with the gods. the centerpiece of the feast, a dish known in ancient texts as the sweet one that does not rot. Imagine this: a large clay urn sealed with wax, buried beneath temple floors for years, some for decades. Inside, human flesh, marinated in honey, not as punishment, but as preparation. Egyptian royalty believed that the body, soaked in pure honey, became both food and medicine, a delicacy for gods, or for men who thought themselves divine. Historians refer to this as meal. Victims, often slaves or criminals, were fed only honey until they died from the inside out. The remains were then packed in more honey and aged. The result? A sticky, amber-colored preserve served in slivers on golden platters, alongside lotus wine and roasted cobra hearts. Scrolls found in the tomb of High Priest Nebuchadnezzar describe the meal as biting sweetness with the aftertaste of memory, and warnings too. Only those pure in soul may digest without visions. Some who partook spoke of seeing the past others, the afterlife. One account tells of a court astrologer who, after tasting a single piece, stood frozen for hours, then began reciting the day of his own death. He was never wrong, but it wasn't just sweetness they served. The priests prepared other cursed delicacies: blackened jackal, liver soaked in myrrh, and a fermented porridge made from dried scorpion powder and ox milk, said to bring prophetic dreams or endless sleep. When Napoleon's men entered Egypt in the 18th century, one account suggests they opened a sealed tomb near Luxor and found an urn marked only with the symbol of sickness. Inside was a crystalline slab of what looked like waxed meat. Still fragrant, one soldier reportedly tasted it on a dare. He was dead within the weekie's face, twisted into a silent scream. Today, the myth of Melify men is dismissed by many as ancient exaggeration. But in private circles, in the dark corners of rare auctions and forbidden recipe scrolls, whispers remain. Would you dine with a god? Or risk being eaten by one? The hollow banquet of imperial China, high atop the cliffs of Mount Hua, beneath silken canopies embroidered with phoenix feathers and curling dragons, the emperors of the Han and Tenth dynasties held their most sacred ritual, the hollow banquet. This was no ordinary imperial feast. Here, chefs were not just cooks, they were alchemists, astrologers, even the dishes prepared were meant not for pleasure or sustenance, but transformation. Immortality was the goal. Madness was the price. One of the most infamous delicacies of the hollow banquet was a dish called moon essence soup, a silver broth shimmering with crushed pearls and mercury sulfides, the very poison we now call silver. It was believed that the moon was the realm of divine immortals, and by consuming its reflection captured in a bowl of night elixir you might steal a piece of eternity. To enhance its effect, the soup was only sipped during eclipses. Each guest was to drink in complete silence, while Duas monks chanted from scrolls stitched with phoenix blood. Those who vomited were dragged away. Those who survived were said to glow under moonlight for days, and speak in voices not their own. Another famed dish, shadow meat, a translucent jelly made from the dried flesh of bats and owls, creatures thought to move between worlds. But the secret ingredient was far worse: powder ground from human fingernails, collected from the recently dead. This was mixed into fermented rice and molded into the shape of a coiled serpent. It was said to allow one to see through lies, or to speak to the deceased during sleep. But perhaps the most feared of all was Dragoness' last breath, a dish served only to the emperor and his closest mystics. It was an egg, solid, black, boiled in a mixture of vinegar, sulfur, snake bile, and the venom of the golden crite. The egg was buried for 7 months beside the bones of executed traitors. When cracked open, the yolk was dark green and pulsating. Only one bite was permitted, and only once in a lifetime. It was said that if the eater's soul was weak, they would die instantly. But if they survived, they would never again know fear. Historical records from the Han court mention several emperors who some claimed visions of the Dragon King, others went mad within days, ripping out their own tongues or drawing the same symbol in blood until they collapsed. Strangely, many of these dishes were also served with counterplatter small plates of antidote foods, pickled plum skin, boiled jade powder, and whisper rice. The implication was chill in every dish was a test. And yet, these rituals weren't only for in remote monasteries, monks would mimic these meals in modified form, eating fermented roots, snake broth, and powdered metals to shed their flesh and achieve Sianda, immortal body. Many were found years later, perfectly preserved, but with twisted expressions, as though they'd seen something unspeakable before death. So tell me, if you were offered a seat at the hollow banquet, would you accept? Would you sip the moon? Or leave your place? For someone braver, the cannibal porridge of ancient tribes deep within the rainforests of Papua New Guinea. Long before the reach of missionaries or modern maps, there existed tribes whose entire understanding of justice and survival revolved around a single dish, kayonala, the porridge of bone and memory. Unlike the frenzied cannibal myths popularized by explorers, this was not a savage feast. It was a sacred rite, a ceremonial meal served to elders, warriors, and the dying, a dish prepared slowly, reverently, under strict taboo. And its key ingredient, human flesh cooked until unrecognizable, then ground into a gray paste with sago flour, sweet banana mash, and crushed river stones. But it wasn't just any flesh, it had to be someone who wronged the tribe enemy warrior, a traitor, or, in darker cases, someone believed to be possessed. They believed that by consuming the body, they consumed the sins, the curses, and the strength of the soul, cleansing it in the fire of digestion and passing it into the tribe's spiritual bloodstream. One ritual account describes the process in chilling detail. They cooked the flesh under moonlight only, never in daylight. The women sang to the bones as they stirred, telling the spirit it was loved, even in punishment. Then the porridge was shared. The youngest ate first to show courage. The eldest ate last to remember. The porridge was thick, slightly sweet, fragrant with herbs, and according to one anthropologist who barely escaped the practice, haunted. The Kalawai and Biami tribes, among others, did not view this as brutality. It was communion, closure, a way to ensure the soul didn't linger, angry and lost. But as colonialism spread, so too did diseases brought by contact. One illness, in particular, became infamous: Karua, brain-wasting disease, now known to be caused by consuming human tissue, especially brain matter. The symptoms were horrific: tremors, uncontrollable laughter, madness, and then death. Villagers believed it was punishment from the spirits, but the science told another story. Proteins twisted into monsters that couldn't be killed by heat, time, or prayer. The practice dwindled but never fully vanished. In 1971, a missionary claimed to have found a ceremonial hut deep in the Sepik Valley, where an urn still bubbled with something thick and dark. The air smelled of burnt sugar and rot. On the walls were painted eyes, hundreds of them, staring down, watching. That missionary never returned to the village. Even today, travelers are warned: never eat what is offered if it has no name. Never ask what gives the stew its warmth, and never ever finish the bowl. Because in the deepest parts of the world, some hungers are still human. The feast beneath the sea, Atlantis, and the salt blood rituals long before Rome rose. Before Babylon bloomed, before even the sands of Egypt were shaped into kingdoms, there was said to be Atlantis, a shining empire swallowed whole by the sea. Scholars debate its truth. Skeptics roll their eyes. But in the scattered myths across oceans and continents, one thing remains eerily consistent. The Atlanteans fed something, known in whispered texts as salt blood feasts. These rituals were not for man, but for what lived below. Ancient mariners feared and worshipped the deep, but Atlanteans, they dined with it. Recovered fragments from Minoan ruins and Doggerlandest sunken stones speak of an offering called the Cradle of Leviathan, a crimson stew brewed from fish brains, seaweed fermented in whale bile, and most disturbingly human infants born under eclipses. The infants weren't always killed. Sometimes they were kept alive, submerged in salt until they stopped crying, and then dissolved slowly in a bath of brine and blood. To eat from this stew was to dream with the ocean, to become one with it. Those who survived at the right claimed visions of spiraling cities of coral and bone, of creatures too vast to be seen all at once, beings with mouths like spirals and eyes like moons. One scribe wrote, "The sea speaks in hunger. Feed it, or be fed to it." And so the Atlanteans did. Banquets were held in glass temples deep beneath the surface. Tables of ivory set with black pearls and teeth from unknown species. Dishes quivered with living tendrils, slick and whispering. The elite fed not only on rare sea creatures but on memory meat harvested from drowned sailors and preserved with sea fungus. It was said to allow one to hear the final thoughts of the dead, if consumed at high tide, under the scream of gulp. But with such meals came a curse. The more you ate, the harder it became to breathe on land. Skin paled, eyes changed. Some Atlanteans stopped speaking entirely, only humming strange lullabies that echoed like what. A few vanished into the depths, never resurfacing, becoming, perhaps, part of the ocean's ever-growing hunger. Plato's Tales may speak of earthquakes and divine wrath, but other theories whisper of something darker, that the final feast awakens something. Something ancient, something that demanded the entire city as payment, and still, rumors persist. In 2004, a submarine crew near the Azores claimed to have seen what looked like a stone arch beneath the seafloor, carved with depictions of men kneeling before a massive creature with 6 eyes and a gaping maw. The area's fish fled the region for weeks. They named the trench below it Mouth of the Forgotten. So, If Atlantis was real, and its people were swallowed, perhaps it wasn't a flood that took them. Perhaps they served one final meal, and then became the dessert. Then, follow closely. We now ascend not into the heavens, but into isolation, into stone monasteries carved into cliffs, where the wind never speaks, and the only sound is breath, or something imitating it. Here, the most sacred meals were not spoken of, not even whispered. They were forbidden. The silence banquet. Forbidden foods of the monastic dead, high in the Himalayas, hidden within paths erased by snow and time. There were monasteries so old that even the monks forgot their origins. In these stone skeletons of faith, silence reigned. No voice, no song, not even a name. Yet every full moon, they gathered for a meal that no outsider was ever meant to see. They called it the silence banquet, not because they ate quaile, but because to speak of it afterward was to go mad. Unlike the elaborate feasts of pharaohs or emperors, this meal was simple. A bowl of thick black a single bone, a strip of dried root, and a cup of what looked like melted wax. Yet what mattered wasn't the food itself but where it came from. The monks who participated in the silence banquet were known as hollow ones. Before their deaths, they underwent a process called sakashin butsua, form of living mummification. They slowly starved themselves over years, eating only tree bark, pine needles, and toxic resins to dry their insides. Then, when near death, they were sealed in stone chambers beneath the monastery, alive. And when the next silence banquet came, the oldest monks would descend into those crypts, chisel open the walls, and extract from the preserved bodies a special offering. Some said it was marrow, others claimed it was dried organ meat, steeped in incense and salt. Whatever it was mixed into the night's meal, binding the living and the dead. To consume this was to accept the dead's wisdom and their silence. Those who ate it reported vivid hallucinations. Visions of past lives, of pale mountains made of bone, of gods with mouths sewn shut. Some wrote prophecies they had no way of knowing. Others clawed out their tongues, leaving only pages scrawled with the same phrase. He hears what we cannot forget. The rituals weren't limited to the East. In 16th century Romania, cryptic records from the Order of the Pale Flame describe monks who cooked their food over human skulls and seasoned it with the ashes of martyred saints. Their meals were silent too. If a voice was heard during supper, even a cough, the offender would vanish by morning, his room left cold and full of feathers. These meals were always eaten in complete darkness. Candles were forbidden. Why? Because they believed the dead walked among them during the banquet, and to shine a light was to see them, and to see them meant they could see you. One chilling account comes from a Tibetan traveler in 1899 who was allowed to observe the silence banquet from a hidden chamber. He reported the monks entering in single file, blindfolded. They sat, ate. No words, no sound, only breath. But halfway through the meal, the number of breaths doubled. He fled. He never returned. Today, the monasteries have crumbled. But in their ruins, locals still find bowls blackened, cracked, and filled with something like dried blood. They say the silence remains, that if you eat from such a bowl under a full moon, you'll never speak again. And worse, you won't need to, because something will speak for you. From the blood bread of Mesopotamia to the cursed banquets of the pharaohs, from Viking madness to the haunted porridge of forgotten tribes, 2 meals offered to the sea and swallowed by silence. Our journey through the ancient table ends here. Or does it? Because every ritual, every feast, every forbidden bite, they were all meant to do one thing: feed something, whether gods, spirits, ancestors, or monsters. They still hunger, and so do we. We are the first humans. We have lived for 12,000 years. For 12,000 years, we have told stories around the fire. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Stories that began with, when I was young, my grandmother told me. Our grandmothers told us about a world without day or night, a world without noise or silence, a world without cold or hunger, a world without fear, a world that existed before the first lie. When we were young, our grandmothers told us about the great feast, about the great mother who held the sun in her hands and scattered its light across the sky. She who gave life to all living things and kept the world in balance. She who taught us how to hunt and fish and gather fruit and herbs. She who protected us from the darkness that craved to consume the world. Our grandmothers told us about the pact, about the mountain that reached into the sky and the river that flowed into the underworld, about the guardians of the threshold who demanded a sacrifice, an offering of blood and bone. And we learned to respect the spirits of the mountains and rivers, the spirits of the earth and sky, the spirits of the dead who walked among us. Our grandmothers told us about the betrayal, about the child who brought death into the world, about the feast that turned into a funeral, about the brother who killed his sister and hid her body under the mountain. And we learned that the world was a dangerous place where even the gods could die. Our grandmothers told us about the exile, about the hero who slew the serpent and rescued the maiden, about the long journey home, about the victory feast and the return of the sun. And we learned that even in the darkest night, hope could bloom. Even when the world was broken, it could be mended. Even when life was lost, it could be given. Because we are storytellers, we are the keepers of the sacred fire. We are the first humans, and we will live forever, for we have eaten the fruit of immortality, and it is our duty to share its gift with all living things.